name is Alyssa.
And I'm Tony.
And we are the Soultry Sisters. We're a community-based organization that empowers women to live healthy and creative lives in North County, San Diego, and recently, DC.
We curate events, workshops, mixers, and meetups centered around women's arts, wellness, and sisterhood.
Our mission is to empower women to live vibrant and shine bright through creative expression and conscious holistic living.
Our vision is to create a safe space that provides women the arts and wellness resources that are affordable and accessible.
So far, we've partnered with Dancing Soul Boutique, Village Rock Shop, Carlsbad Village Yoga Co-op, and nonprofit organization Leap to Success. To find out more information about us and to sign up for our future events, visit SoultrySisters.com.
You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Soultry Sisters.
We hope to see you soon.
Hey y'all, welcome back. So this is episode 2, but we're going over part 1 of Rest is Resistance. So we're super excited to be back with you all again. We're excited to bring in the new year with rest as our topic. So yes, of course, if you're tuning in, let us know where you're tuning in from and what you're sipping on.
Yes, this is our second Soultry Hangout of the year. So happy to be back weekly hanging out with y'all. I am Alyssa, one half of the Soultry Sisters, and I am tuning in from not so sunny San Diego. It's been raining, it's been a little gloomy, and today I'm sipping on some hibiscus tulsi tea. It's some tea that Tony left behind, so there's a little bit of you here, girl.
Nice. Hi, everyone. So I am tuning in from Washington, D.C. So I am back now in my sanctuary on the East Coast. And I am drinking some tulsi tea. And I also have some calamansi, so some fresh Philippine lemons inside with some honey. So it's nice, soothing, reminds me of home. So yeah, a little bit of Tulsi as well. Tulsi twins.
Tulsi twins. We see some people dropping in live. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know what you're sipping on. We're super excited to dive into today's topic. For those of you who are joining us, we are reading the book Rest is Resistance. And today we're discussing part 1, rest.
Yes, and if you did not get a chance to watch last week's episode, you can watch the replay on our YouTube or our Facebook. So it's on there. So that was the intro. So definitely check that out. And subscribe to us at Soultry Sisters on all platforms, but on YouTube, so you'll get notified when we go live right away. And then you'll also get to see when we post our replays up.
All right, we got Kyle Moore in from Wheaton, sipping on some sweet tea.
Welcome.
Yes. I guess tea's trending tonight.
Yes. And of course, if you're like, what is this book club? What's going on? How long is it for? You can go to our website, soultrysisters.com/book club, and it has all of the dates. So every Wednesday at this time, same place, it has what chapters we'll be talking about for each session, how to find the replays, and all that good stuff. So definitely check out our website and learn more. And yes, our January theme is rest and reset. So we also have some fun things coming up. So I'll do some announcements. So this Sunday, I am teaching our first Soul Flow of the year. So our Soul Flow is our mindful movement practice series. So I'll be teaching yoga to invite us into a restful practice as we start the year. And then Alyssa will be teaching on the 22nd, Pilates. And then on the 29th of January, we're having a virtual Soulscape practice. So Soulscape is our somatic embodiment practice that's kind of more of like a free-flowing dance practice that starts with like affirmations, mantras, and goes into our movement. And we'll be channeling this theme of rest and reset. So it'll be a perfect way to culminate our month of January after we've gone through all of Rest is Resistance. And Alyssa, do you want to announce our really, really exciting news about the book club?
Yes, some really exciting news about our book club. We tagged the author, the Nap Bishop of the Nap Ministry, and she will be joining us on our final Soultry Hangout live here on YouTube, y'all. Yes, we're so excited, so humbled. I mean, we've been following her work and really we're excited to dive into this book, and the fact that she wants to spend some time with us on our last meeting for this book club means a lot. Fun fact, actually Tricia led book clubs, like that's a part of her journey. So it was really cool to learn that on one of her lives this past week. So definitely, if you haven't yet, follow the Nat Ministry, get into supporting the Nat Bishop and all the work they do. We'll have them here live with us for 30 minutes. So definitely make sure to tune in so you can ask your questions, leave comments. We're super excited for that. And that's going to be February
1st. Yes,
3rd.
our last February 1st. So it's our last. 1st. Yes, it's our last session. So February 1st. So the first half of the live will finish and wrap up the book. So the Imagine chapter, and then the last 30 minutes we'll do a Q&A with Tricia. So definitely join us for our live session, and then we'll also be able to record it so you all be able to see the replay as well.
Yes, can't wait for that, y'all.
Yes. So we wanted to check in with you all on how has your rest practice looked like this week. So we dived into the intro of the book last week, and as you all were reading the first chapter, Rest, what came up for you all?
What has your rest practice looked like? Yes, leave a comment below. If you're watching the replay, feel free to leave your comments. We do read them. We do engage. We continue this conversation all month, so we love hearing from you. I can start first with sharing how what my rest practice has looked like this week or since last Wednesday. So for me, my rest practice has looked like actually spending time in my bed before I go to sleep, reading this book. So
Nice.
I do a lot of different things as my resting practice. Actually, there's 7 types of rest. Fun fact, we can get into that later. But for me, one thing I have been doing is physically winding down my body, physically laying in my bed, deciding which of my pillows I'm going to sleep on. Fun fact, I have 8 pillows on my bed that are not decorative. 8 pillows. And so, yeah, I spent some time figuring out which pillow I'm going to rest my head on, which pillow I'm going to hug, which pillow going to go between my legs. So that's been something my rest practice has been looking like something new. I'm saying something new. Yeah.
Nice. And then Kyle shared no judgment naps. Awesome. Yeah. So I have actually been taking naps the last couple of days. I think it's also partially since I traveled from the West Coast to the East Coast, just kind of adjusting back to the time change and being in my space again. But my rest practice has looked like continuing my walks outside. So even though it's cold here, I'm trying to be consistent so I can get that nature in. So I did take a nice long walk before the live this evening. So that has been nice, part of my rest practice. And also my tea. So drinking my tea is a nice way for me to kind of connect with myself, because when I'm choosing which tea I want, I'm asking myself okay, what do I need right now? And it's just very soothing, and it's just a part of my soul care. So that has been something that has been helpful as I've been easing my way back into my life here.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that because as I'm marinating on what my practice has looked like, something that has been illuminated in this past 3 days is my rest practice has looked like not letting grind culture get the best of me, not letting grind culture spark my anxiety. So I just started teaching new group classes with my Pilates and arts business. And I've been teaching virtually online, and I haven't had any participants. It's just been me, myself, and the Zoom and the recording. And one thing that Rest is Resistance, this book has kind of given me this new perspective on I'm showing up for myself and in the abundance leading a practice. But at the end of the day, I'm showing up for myself. And I'm not gonna lie, grind culture and the competitiveness in my ego in the past would have been if no one's here, I'm not going to practice. No one showed up for the class. Oh, that's a free moment for me to do whatever, which is fine too. But I also took the time to continue to practice the class, even if no one was there. And that was rest for me. That was my creative rest to kind of like give myself space to flow and go through the practice. So for me, it's like this book is, I feel it kind of changing my mindset, like not just around rest, but like how I resist how grind culture and capitalism, white supremacy can get me to think less of myself if I don't have money attached to something or don't have a type of receipt that is standard for like, oh, that you're doing a good job. I'm like, I'm doing a good job because I'm here and I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I feel like this book really is, which that's why she says a manifesto, right? It's like a guide to be like, okay, this is rest and this is what it can look like for us, which we'll get into today. And also with, yeah, when you're talking about just being unapologetic about your rest, I feel like that's how I've been feeling as well, like through reading the book, is that like, because yeah, I feel like just unlearning and deconditioning my brain and my mind that rest is okay. And like she mentions in the chapter too, is that like it doesn't have to be resting to be productive, just like rest as our divine right, as our innate wisdom, all of that stuff, which we'll get into in today's session. But that has meant a lot to me. And I appreciate that, like in the chapter, she does like repeat these statements because it's like so important. So I feel like the repetition is to call importance to it and to really ingrain it. Because, right, like we've had our whole lifetime so far being indoctrinated into grind culture, into white supremacy culture, and all of that. So it's like it is going to take time, like she says, to unlearn these things. So I do appreciate that she's really like, no, like rest is resistance. Like you are enough. Like rest is your birthright. Like it has meant a lot to me and my journey. Just as we start this new year as well, because sometimes there's always like that pressure to like be doing a lot in the new year, and it's like it's winter time. Why? So that has been helpful.
We wanted to ask a secondary question to y'all is, what is your current relationship to rest? So this whole discussion today, this whole chapter, part 1, is all about rest. So we want to kind of ground this conversation of where we're at now. What is our current relationship to rest as we dive into this work?
Yeah, I would say when I think of this question as like, what is our current relationship to rest? I think of how now I feel like I'm cultivating a healthy relationship with rest, but I would say for a long, long time, it's unhealthy or like almost like when you think of the attachment styles, like I think I've had for a long time, like an anxious attachment to rest. Like if I rest, then like these things aren't going to get done, or if I rest, then like I'm gonna be like not seen as like as good as a worker or as all these things versus now. But just in the last year, especially then now reading this book, I feel like for me, I have a healthier attachment to rest that like I don't necessarily, I try not to judge myself. I mean, it's still a practice, it's a journey, but I'm leaning more into being non-judgmental, like Kyle said, about my rest, and really leaning into rest and appreciating it and like listening to my body. And like she mentions a lot, just be like, that's a phrase that I've really embodied over the past year, is just being like present. And so I feel like I do have a healthy relationship now, but it wasn't always the case.
Ooh, we have a share. Kyle says, I've gotten a lot out of repetition in the book as well. A lot of the book is deconditioning. Yes, she talks about deprogramming. I'm reacquainting myself with rest too. Yes. I was going to like just like adding on to both Kyle's share and your share, Tony. I feel like my current relationship to rest is expanding. I feel like last week we talked about the like 7 types of rest: physical, mental, sensory, creative, emotional, social, and spiritual. And like some of those I did not equate to as rest. Like I didn't think about, like I had an idea like mental and physical and sensory rest. And creative rest was hard for me because I am an artist. So when I think of creativity, sometimes I can think of it as work, but then the work that we do at Soultry is definitely creative expression. So I'm like, okay, yeah, definitely creative. And then it's the emotional, social, and spiritual. That's the relationship to rest that I am expanding upon. That's the part that I'm starting to, the more I know, the more I can tap into it, because I can be intentional about how I get that emotional rest, how I get that social rest, and how I get the spiritual rest. I feel like the first 4, I'm like, okay, I understand that. I have examples of what that looks like in my life, but the last 3, like, I had to, like, I'm still expanding upon them and what those practices look like for me.
Yeah, and with the 7 types of rest, like spiritual rest, I don't think I necessarily had an understanding or a name for that beforehand, but I feel like my nature walks are spiritual rest. So now
Right.
having that language, I really just appreciate them even more of like, okay, yeah, like why is this restful? Like, oh, okay, because it's pouring into my spiritual rest. Of course, sometimes they overlap with other things, but I think that's
Mhm.
especially why after a long day, my walks outside are really nice and fulfilling and nourishing because it provides that type of rest.
Yeah, and like one thing the spiritual rest is like tending to my crystals, cleaning my altar. Like it is something that's active, like I'm doing something, but it's like the intention. I think that's what this chapter which we'll get into, it's like really brought me uh closer to my own personal intention of what rest is going to look like for me moving
Mhm.
forward.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing. And yeah, again, as we go on, if you all have any comments or anything, just please do add them in the comments below, even if you're watching the replay, because we will go back and see that later as well. And so we do want to share some of the quotes that stood out to us in this chapter. And it was quite hefty content wise
Mhm.
in the chapter. So, we're going to do our best to get through all the quotes that we wanted to illuminate for you all. But if you have any quotes as we go through as well, definitely share them and we'll take time to
Yes.
discuss.
And if you have the book, this is the time to break it out, y'all. We're going to be sharing quotes and page numbers as well.
Yes. So this week we've been talking about part 1, rest, right? So we talked about the intro last week, and now we're like, okay, what is rest? So Tricia defines rest for us and gives us like anecdotes about how rest has showed up in her life, what made her start this rest journey, how rest is connected to liberation, and all that good stuff. Um, and so the first question we wanted to pose to you all at first is how can we create more space for rest in our daily lives? And that's something we'll get through too as we go on. But these are just questions to think about as we're
Mhm.
discussing, to ruminate on. So, again, how can we create more space for rest in our daily lives? What would it feel like to be consistently rested? What does exhaustion look like for me? And then who taught you to rest? So those questions we'll kind of ruminate on as we go along the chapter, and then we'll have some time at the end to kind of reflect. But when she talks about rest, she has a lot of different anecdotes that to me stuck out a lot. And so the first quote I wanted to share was, again, we kind of mentioned it last week in the intro, but she starts off the chapter with the quote from her grandmother, Aura. So she says, "Every shut eye ain't sleep. I'm resting my eyes. I'm listening." And I feel like
Mhm.
this quote really illuminates, especially I feel like in the our foremothers language, right? Like just rest is a part of our practices and have been a part of, the Black community. And it's not a new thing,
Mhm.
that we've found ways to rest in different spaces, and how maybe rest doesn't look like what we think it does now, but our elders have rested, and kind of how have we inherited rest practices. That's what made me think that's a question that came up for me. And then like who like were models of rest, and then maybe people who weren't models of rest, like Trisha mentions her dad's story and how maybe that was a model of if you
Mhm.
don't rest, this is what can happen as well. um so yeah, that's a question for you all to share in the comments, like who taught you to rest, if there was anyone, or if there's any pivotal moments in your journey that made you learn to rest. And then another quote is that I really appreciated her mentioning was, "We are born knowing how to rest and listen to our bodies, what our bodies need. It's second nature and an inner knowing." And so
Yes.
I appreciate her mentioning how, like, babies, like infants, know how to rest. Like, they know that they need food, so they'll cry, and they know when they need to rest as well. And I thought that was really liberating for me to hear her name it in that way, of that it's second nature and an inner knowing. So again, when we're reading this book on rest as resistance, it's not necessarily something we need to learn from an external source and then like integrate this knowledge in our life. It's to really more so dig deep inward and like, what do we need,
Mhm.
and to ask ourselves, and we'll have those answers for ourselves too. So that quote illuminated that for me, that like, we already know.
Yes.
Like, it's
I
a
mean,
part of us.
exactly. When I think about who taught you to rest, I think about my first preschool teacher, Mama Kay. Mama Kay taught me how to rest, because in daycare we had nap time. We had a nap
Hmm.
time, and I think about like our early childhood experiences. Maybe those some of you can relate. I grew up in daycare, and the two things that are like vivid in my memory of daycare was nap time and recess, playing outside. And it's interesting how like as we get older, how rest and play are just snatched. It's just snatched, and you're
Hmm.
like, where do those two things come go? And as I'm diving into my healing journey, those are the two things that are coming back and integrating, like Tony was saying, that I'm integrating back and coming back and reclaiming is my rest and my playtime. So isn't that interesting how like that's such a big part of our school at the beginning of our
Hmm.
education, or maybe not even education, but culture maybe for some people. But then it's like, when did that get snatched? So something to think.
Yeah, and just like reclaiming that
Mhm.
is part of her practice. And yeah, I would love that for all of us. So Kyle shares, "I had to learn to rest through experiencing burnout. Not ideal, but I was a good student. And being a good student of a toxic system means you internalize toxicity
Mm,
in some ways, unfortunately." Yeah, unfortunately, I felt the same way, especially in grad school. So yeah, I feel like a lot of life circumstances have taught
mm,
me to rest. And then Kyle also shared, "Been thinking a lot about the importance of play as well as I've read this." Yes, I
mhm,
think play is really important as well, and that's kind of can go into maybe that creative rest and the seven types of
mhm.
rest. Um, and yeah, it's like not take ourselves too seriously, and also to not take rest too seriously either. Like, like rest can look like a bunch of different things to us, and it can change and can be flexible, it can fluctuate. So to also not be like rest has to be a rigid thing, like it's definitely not that way how she describes it.
Yeah, rest can be going away from something. I'm gonna walk away from the computer and do something else. It doesn't have to be like a full-on nap, a full-on bath, a massage.
Hmm.
It can be literally just shifting your perspective, shifting your attention.
Hmm.
She even mentions like later on, like closing your eyes,
Hmm.
focus on breathing. But speaking of internalized, we're going to be talking about internalized grind culture next. So Kyle, you right on time.
Yeah, so internalized grind culture. So I appreciate also that she names as internalized, 'cause I think a lot of people, when we talk about like white supremacy culture, capitalism, they're like, well, I'm not those big corporations, like I'm not these people, so like therefore like I'm not a part of this, or like I can't be to blame. And it's like, well, it's internalized. It's like the fact that we've been learning this and being conditioned in this way since we were infants, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, the part that being internalized, I feel like to me gives language to understand that like it's in all of us, especially if we're raised in Western society. So it's like it is your personal
Yeah.
journey if you are on this rest journey, part of the rest movement, to unlearn and decondition yourself from this internalized grind culture.
And here's like an example of like what makes me like understand more like internalized, anything internalized or specifically internalized ground culture is like when you feel like I have to do something now, like that
Yeah.
urgency. It's the urgency that's a lie. And you're like,
Hmm.
and as we're adults, it's like, why do I feel like I have to do this before bed? That's the internalized ground culture. Why do I feel like I
Hmm.
have to do this before I take a break, before I go on vacation,
Hmm.
before? All of those reasons that hold you back from taking that break, from doing what you need to do to rest, That's the internalized grind culture. It's that insidious. It's that simple. It's not like I want to be a venture capitalist. It's not like you trying to get out here and rip people off and MLMs out here. No, that's not the grind culture. Internalized grind culture is you feel like you got to show up somewhere at a certain time because who told you to?
Yeah, exactly.
That
So
is
much.
what it is.
Yeah, so that kind of goes into the quote we want to share. So the link between sleep deprivation and stress is to the development of chronic diseases is real, right? So I think again, like grind culture being like, we'll sleep when we're dead, right? Like sleep is for the weak. So I really appreciate that she talks about sleep being a public health issue and a social justice issue. And the next quote is Black people get less sleep than their white counterparts. And I kind of wanted her to go more into it, but since I'm a public health professional, I can just say what off top of my head I think of. And so when I think of this, like these disparities in sleep health and sleep wellness, I think of how Black and Brown communities are disproportionately adjacent to airplane, airports, highly polluted areas, factory farms, like just all
Public
those things.
streets, just
Yeah, those busy freeways, and those things can affect your sleep health. So yeah, so me being in the public health space, I'm just like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of data to support that. Because sleep is important. And I think again, as we get older, the importance of sleep becomes small and small, right? Because then, especially people who have children, who have families, and also work or have to do other things outside of their home, there's this kind of assumption that, like, okay, well, you're just going to sleep less because you still need to do your full time job, you still need to show up, you still need to do all these things. But people aren't necessarily supportive. Society isn't supportive of that. Maybe in these life transitions, you're gonna need more sleep, even like, but that's I feel like, yeah, with people who have newborns, I feel like they would need a lot more sleep actually, but they get like such
less.
a small,
And it's an
tiny
accepted
amount.
thing. It's the
Yeah.
individualism and not the collective. And like illuminating this conversation even more, I want to add this quote: "We are barely surviving from our sleep deprivation, worker exploitation, and exhaustion. We must rest." Like, and it's talking about new mothers, college students,
Yeah.
anyone working and trying to make
Yeah.
ends meet. And it's like, the narrative of like going to the doctor and you're sleep deprived, like you need to take better care of yourself. You need to do more. It's like, do more. Like, I think sometimes even our Western healthcare system doesn't even acknowledge the fact that some of this chronic disease does not come from not taking care of yourself. It doesn't come just from Popeyes and not going on a walk. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
from our Black community doesn't come from like just not taking care of ourselves. Like, I don't like that narrative. And I feel like this book, additionally to others, part of my healing journey is like, and she talks about this, like not even being a part of that narrative, like not even a part of that. Like, that is white supremacy trying to give us a narrative and be toxic into like having us believe these things about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like with the quote before this, like the Black people get less sleep than the white counterparts. Like me being a Black woman, I go to, oh, these systems are unjust and the built environments are not made for us to sleep, versus a white person probably be like, oh, Black people just don't know that they should be resting. And
it's like, it's not
no, that's
ignorance. It's not ignorance. People aren't resting. It's not ignorant. It's like,
yeah, it's
that's
like we're just white supremacy and capitalism and XYZ things have just built society around expecting us, especially Black women and Black folks and people of color, to not rest, right? If we rest, we're seen as lazy, as
that
not
word.
hardworking, as, like just going by, like scraping by bare minimum. And it's like, we do a lot. Like, first of all, we uphold society by, every amazing things that Black women do, but people don't give us the credit. So yeah, very exhausting. And that's what she mentions, like exhaustion, which I felt like in especially like the Black liberation movement, I haven't felt that always exhaustion and sleep deprivation have been uplifted as core issues. I feel like it's been other things that are specifically named, but not necessarily like we need rest. Like obviously our foremothers and our elders in the social justice movements before us have rested, right, in order to survive.
Mhm.
But I haven't heard of it until like reading this book that like it's a core element. I
Yeah,
mean,
rest as
there are things,
reparations.
yeah, like there are like photos and things and documents of like Rosa Parks doing yoga and Angela Davis like
Yeah.
resting, right? But I felt like that wasn't always like what you see in social media of like what Black liberation movement looks like. Maybe in the wellness space, but so I do appreciate this book kind of giving more support to those ideas.
We got
And
some
then
comments.
yes, Cal says there's a whole literature on this called John Henryism,
Mm.
coming from Sherman James's work in social epidemiology. It's the high effort coping Black folks do to cope with external stressors. Yes. So
Mm.
working extra hard to like prove yourself, working extra hard. What's the other quote? Like you have to work twice as hard to get,
Mhm.
you know, that kind of stuff falls into what Kyle was just sharing. And then in the face of psychosocial stressors, Blacks use high effort coping due to their increased exposure to psychosocial
Mhm.
stressors in response to race related obstacles such as racial discrimination. Exactly. Thank you, Kyle,
Mhm.
for sharing that. Dr. Moore coming in with a great
Coming in with the
research and data. We appreciate it. Thank you. But yeah, so there's clearly, been work done on this, and there's other works to support what Tricia is sharing. So I appreciate, like all of those synergies, which is really helpful to, for those of us who are really interested in like
Mhm.
learning more, that there is other work out there, which is really helpful.
I also wanted to share this, like, thank you so much, Kyle, but for sharing that and how, like, there's a deprogramming. Like, there are
Hmm.
studies out there, there are conversations and articles. This is not new, what Trisha's talking about. Like, there's a reason why our
Hmm.
ancestors got this far, survived. It's almost like that reclaiming, the remembering, the coming back to the
Hmm.
sankofa of it all. Everything we believe we know about rest is false, and socializing and socialization of grind culture. We must be intentional about reimagining what we believe rest is and can be for our lives. And I think that's what,
Hmm.
like, talking about who's resting for, like, we have to reclaim that, like, how it's going to be in our lives, how it's going to integrate. Um, and I love
Hmm.
this other quote too, like, this work is about slow unraveling that will require our participation for our entire lives. How humbling is that to know, y'all,
Hmm.
that after this book club series, we don't have to have the answers? This is the time to ask questions. This is our time to collaborate and share resources to be a source of comfort, coping. So yeah, I feel like that is definitely like affirming for me that I don't have to, like, know the answer and be healed tomorrow. And it's a culture shift rooted in an embodiment lens. This means we must actively practice, engage, and push back against dominant culture.
Hmm.
Like, I
Yeah, I
just
feel like
really appreciate that.
I feel like this quote really embodies and illuminates like a lot of what she just talked about in the first chapter, but her work in general, especially it being a cultural shift, and that it is gonna, it's not gonna be overnight, and it's a long journey, and it's going to be a practice, and that also it's like an act, like she said, we must actively practice as well,
Mhm,
so not just like passively, like, oh, okay, I'm just doing it here and there, but really being intentional
mhm.
is really important. And she mentions like resisting, right? She mentions like disrupting, all these things that I feel like aren't typically associated in dominant culture with rest. I feel like
Mhm.
rest is usually associated with being passive, with being something you just do, or like happens to you, like, oh, I was so tired, I just happened to rest. But like versus like I'm resting because like I'm reclaiming my
It's re
time, I'm
Yeah, it's
reclaiming my
rebel.
body. Yeah. And she also mentions how like, rest being a way for you to like reclaim your own body, right? Like you don't have to
Yeah.
grind your body physically, like how plantation
Mm,
labor and slavery and things like that have like use our bodies in that way. So I feel like that's really healing as well, to know that it's a whole mind, body, soul, spirit, community thing, which is how we define soul care anyways, which I think is makes it so
yeah.
aligned with like the work that we do.
Mhm. And then next we want to talk about rest and womanism. I really appreciate how Tricia brought this together because, as Soultry sisters, we talk about like holistic health, collective healing, the community care of it all. And Tricia also talks a lot about like this work will only work if we're all about the collective, the wholeness of it. So I really appreciated her mentioning this, and we're going to take some time to share some quotes.
Yes. And I just want to shout out, I am wearing my shirt, support Black women,
Yes.
by the way. So that's the tip that
We're
we're
gonna be on
on all the
brand,
time.
on topic.
Yes. But yeah, womanism, I feel like not all folks are familiar with womanism. So I appreciated that she was, was able to define that and things for folks who this might be their first time learning about that. So a quote we wanted to share is the beauty of womanism is its holistic view of change. And so with womanism, it takes account, the race, class, gender that Black women experience, but also the family and community that she mentions all as well in that part of the chapter. So she's mentioning how, Black women, the family community have always been important. So the collective, right? Like, how are we, healing and being well all together has been at the root of our work as womanists. And so resting has been a part of that as well.
Yeah, I kind of
And
wanted
so,
I kind of wanted to read like a little paragraph that ends with this quote.
mhm,
The term womanist was coined by Alice Walker. She's one of my favorite poets in 1983. It appeared in her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens and defines a womanist as wanting to know more and in greater depth than is considered good for one, committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female. So it's inclusive of y'all too. For me, the beauty of womanism is its holistic view of change. It centers the deep shared commitment Black women have to their family and community. Unlike white feminism, womanism holds space for race, class, and gender and understands the family and community of a Black woman are collaborators in the struggle for liberation.
mhm,
I
yes,
mean, it goes on and on, but I just really want people, like, if you're joining in, just to also understand, like, the root and context of womanism. It's a term that came from, this history. So,
mhm, yeah. So there's white feminism, which is very performative usually. And then there's Black feminism, and then there's womanism, right? So you can be a Black feminist and a womanist. You could just be a womanist. You could just be a Black feminist. I would not recommend being a white feminist, but yeah. So there's some different
layers.
variations of that. But yeah, womanism essentially is like about the collective, about the holistic whole, about seeing oneself in as a whole. Um, so like a lot of times women also talk about like mind, body, spirit connections and all that,
Mhm,
which she talks about in her book, Tricia. So it makes sense to me that she identifies
mhm,
as a womanist because of her approach to
mhm,
her work is very holistic, and the approach to our work as well is very holistic.
mhm.
So it makes sense in why our work aligns.
Yeah, it really, like, that's what really illuminated that for me, and I was like, "Oh, I feel
Mhm,
that." And she also says womanism is what allows me to see rest as a tool for
mhm,
liberation. So it's like a part of that's why for us, like Soultry, we've taken times to rest and and see how it's all a part of our not only the way we work, but like how we are able to sustain ourselves. And also, I'm like losing my train of thought. How we were able to give ourselves seasons,
mhm,
like the holistic part of it. I'm like, I this chapter on this specific section really had my mind like swirling because I felt so I resonated so much with the context of like her why.
mhm. And Cal shared this section resonated with me too. Our obsession with grinding and productivity feels like a symptom of us having a hyper masculine culture. Womanism implies a healthier balance of energies, I think. Yeah, so it's like with grind culture, it is very like masculine in the fact of not necessarily gender, but in energy, right? Just like the yang, like the go, 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 like not rest, like yin energy is more so resting. So like yin and yang, the dualities of that. So yeah, I feel you, Kyle, with her approach being rooted in womanism. Yeah, it's about, resting, it's about leaning into that yin feminine energy. It's, having that balance as well, right? Like the holistic view is that it's all part of a whole. Like you can't have just one half and be whole. Like you have yin and yang, you have masculine and feminine energy to make a whole. And I think that's just what she's trying to share too. So I appreciate how she's like grounding us in her approach and her epistemology. So like why she does the work that she does.
I appreciate this quote too. My freedom from grind culture is ultimately tied up in the healing and liberation of all those around me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the womanism of them. That's the collective
Mm-hmm.
community care of it. And she was saying like, if I rest, that's great, but I want everyone to be rested because it's like we interact with each other. Like how
Mm-hmm.
people, interact is like if you're well rested, how you're going to communicate, what you're going to expect from others. And I can identify with that. I'm like, yeah, when I'm well rested, when I take some time and pause, I give that back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And like she mentions like interconnectedness a lot, which is also a part of womanism, like interconnection with your mind, body, spirit, but also interconnected with the community around you as well. And she also mentions like Dr. King, she mentions Fannie Lou Hamer, she mentions Bell
Mhm.
Hooks. So I appreciate her just like, shouting out these elders and their work and how that really, all of this is intertwined. That I think she really is just rooting that like this is not new, this is not different. People have been talking about this, like it has been a practice in the Black liberation movement. Like people have mentioned this along
And
their
I feel like
journey.
she also mentioned too, like people don't participate in this liberation movement thinking that's going to solve through them. They have
Hmm.
that's that faith, right? That's that.
Hmm.
And some of the anecdotes, it's like that's the faith, that's the community of it. Like it's not like you want to leave it better than you left it kind of thought. Like I just feel like it's about the legacy of rest. And for me, I appreciate that because it's like a lot of times white supremacy and grind culture, like I'm going to solve it now. I'm going to be the person that solves it. I'm going to be the Christopher Columbus of rest. Like, no, that doesn't need to be that. Like that energy doesn't need to be here. So I really appreciate her naming these leaders to really root this work in Black liberation. And then ending this section talking, she has this question she asked in the book. This chapter so far has had the most questions.
Yeah.
And I think she wants you to like pause, rest, and
Hmm.
reflect. And so
Yeah.
this one is, so now that we've talked about, you know, internalized grind culture, where we learned rest, like where do we place the grief of our treatment under grind culture, under white supremacy, under all that? Like, where do we place this grief? And for me, it's like, wow, like I had to sit with them. Like, where am I going to put
Hmm.
this? Like, where do we place
Hmm.
the grief?
Yeah, and I
Where do
think
we
what she
process it?
mentions too in this chapter is that rest allows you to find those answers for yourself or to even just release that you don't have to hold on to that grief or to that mistreatment, that it, through resting, then that's that healing process.
Mhm.
Um,
For me, where I was like, for me to where thinking about the process of placing the grief was acknowledging like the system, like holding the truth, processing the truth versus like it's not that bad. I'm like, no, it doesn't feel good to understand. It doesn't feel good to really process that we live in this system, and there's no like blink in the eye, there's no nap, sleep, vacation that's going to get us out of it. So for me, like I'm placing the grief right now through like processing the truth and allowing myself to just like, I wouldn't use the word accept, but to acknowledge that I live in a system, like being a fish in the water. it's almost like people always say like it takes knowing it first to then change your behavior. So for me, like part of me placing the grief is like where I'm placing grief, I'm placing it in the truth box.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely important to like acknowledge it. So I think that's why she repeats it over and over again in case someone like skipped over it. So like you have moments to like really sit with it. And so I appreciate this quote that rest must interrupt. Like hope, rest is disruptive. It
Mm.
allows space for us to envision new possibilities, right? So rest, like she said, is not passive, right? It interrupts things, disrupts, and it also gives space. So, like she said, like hope, like you have space for it to have new possibilities. So it is not just daunting and negative of like, oh, like grind culture and it's terrible and like we just have to exist in it. But it's like through rest is the answer. It is the solution. It is collective healing that we need as a collective and as a society to be able to have and
Mhm.
dream up of a new world.
And continuing this interruption, it's like it's time that we begin to the dismantling of the cult of business, one person at a time. I was like, yes, the cult of business needs to be done. She says, one person at a time, one heart at a time, one body at a time. And what I love about her writing right here, like just this quote, is like she did that on a purpose. She ended one person at a time, period, pause. One heart at a time, period, pause. One body at a time, period, to kind of show how this work is not going to be like just flowing down a river. It's going to have those interruptions. We're in this grind culture cycle. So it's going to take a little double dutch, a little bit of this, a little dancing to kind of figure out what's going to work for us, and it's going to change. So I really appreciate like in her writing, like when she chooses to flow, when she chooses to pause and make sentences shorter. This was one of the quotes that I'm like, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, definitely. As a writer, she chose some of those, made those informed choices. Um, so now I want to go into rest and accessibility because she talks a lot about like who is rest for and what does that look like for us as a collective. Um,
Yeah,
Especially when
and
we talk about liberation, right? Like
mhm.
liberation, it's like we're not free unless we're all free. So I feel like that's a part of accessibility.
Yeah, I want to read some. So we center the issue of accessibility and try to answer the following questions. What becomes, this is page 65, y'all. What becomes of the people who cannot afford to be away from their homes for 24 hours or a weekend? What about the people who have children and no childcare? How will those who are homebound due to disability participate in a retreat that requires travel? What about the introverts who don't want to be around groups? How will the rest continue after they return home? Why are their homes and communities seen as a place that needs to be left behind to rest? I'm going to pause there. But I just really appreciate her saying accessibility doesn't mean you need to like, I think for me, I interpret it as like, why can't I just rest here? Like, why can't I just be? And how
Hmm.
that's why she talks about rest and this movement being like, it's you're enough, just rest right here, close your eyes, like what her grandmother Aura was saying, I'm resting my eyes. And I think she's really trying to this also um, show that this rest practice, she's working to make it accessible by saying it doesn't have to be these things, because there's
Hmm.
these people that she mentioned that have kids and have work disabilities. Like we all deserve rest. So we have to make it as it doesn't have to be that deep. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be tied to capitalism. It doesn't have to be tied to going somewhere or buying something. So I really appreciated her saying that rest and accessibility is an important part of the movement.
Hmm. Yeah, like with accessibility, yeah, it's like it's inside of you, right? Like the quote I mentioned towards the beginning of today's live was that like we have this inner knowing, and like that's resting connects us back to our true selves
Mhm.
and our inner nature. And yeah, so you don't need those like expensive retreats. You don't have to be in a space with like 7 meditation pillows or like, whatever, like it's
Yeah.
whatever it is inside of you, like you create that rest, you create your inner peace. Of course, these things can help sometimes and it does feel nice, but you don't need it. And that's the core of our work as Soultry too, is that we wanted our, type of experiences to be accessible, that you can do anywhere and for anyone.
Yeah, and for me, that's where her sharing that like praying is resting and resting is praying, and it comes back to this last question, and that on page 66 is, why isn't our rest powerful enough to be accessed anytime and anywhere? Like, why can't it be?
Mhm.
And then I thought about her talking about her grandmother closing her eyes, talk about the power of prayer, the power of a meditation, breath work, just how, I think that's what I appreciate about this deprogramming is like the attachment that rest has to be to a bed, rest has to be on a vacation. Like I
Mhm.
really appreciate like her really like digging in there. Like why
Mhm.
can't it like why isn't our rest powerful enough to be accessed anytime, anywhere? I don't need that
Mhm.
cot.
Mhm.
You
Yeah, and it's
know?
also like it's different for every person. I think that's what she means by accessibility too. Like if your rest only looks like one thing, then like it's not accessible because like,
Mhm.
different people have different needs. And I think that's why it's important to ask yourself, like what do I need? Like what's gonna be the most fulfilling rest in this moment? And that can change and that could be more active rest, that could be more passive rest, like whatever that looks like for you is valid and true. And then Kyle shares, can't remember if this was this or last chapter, but I like the idea of rest as fugitivity as well,
Mhm.
which kind of points to how anyone can access rest at any time and it has to be taken. Yes, I think
Yes,
I was
that's
mentioned
this
during this
chapter.
chapter.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, a
Absolutely.
very important talk about this work. So some quotes we want to share is, even if your timeline is curated to only include joyful, thought-provoking, and encouraging messages, detoxing is still necessary and valuable, and your mind needs space for silence. So again, with accessibility, this is talking about social media. So like if on social media you're only, even if you just follow the Nat Ministry and like Soultry Sisters, how that is still like
Mhm.
something that your body is processing. And so it's still important for you to have space away from that, with like we
Mhm.
talked about last week, like for stillness, for slowness, all of that like is important in your journey for rest.
And then an exodus and intentional detox from these platforms are the North Star of our rest practice. So she's very like she spends some time in this chapter talking, going in on social media and talking about social media being a place that we need to take time away from, because our North Star is in our rest practice. And a lot of times we do,
Hmm.
find ourselves scrolling. And that's something that reading this chapter has made me more cognizant of. I think because we have Soultry Sisters and I have another business on social media, I often will go on at least my business platforms, be like, well, I'm just making sure, and this is what kind of gave me like more, allowed me to question myself a little further. Like, okay, but do you need to right now?
Hmm.
And so now I'm having like more of that conversation with myself.
Yeah, I think with social media as well, it's like asking yourself, like, does this actually feel good for me? Like, is this, part of my play? Is it part of my joy, my pleasure for the day? Or am I just doing it because I feel obligated, right? Am I doing it because I feel like this grind culture that I need to be on it? So I
Mhm.
think, with all of this comes like the reflection internally. And if it is rooted in, like, oh, like I want to watch this really funny video because it brought me joy, then yeah, I don't think she's saying like never watch those things, but I think it's like the balance and the flow of like internally asking yourself, like, if you need rest, then like, is this a restful space? But if you
Mhm.
are fulfilled and rested, then it can be as well. And I think also she just talks about how like social media is like linked with like white supremacy culture and grind culture. So yeah, like if just to internally start deprogramming those
Yes, to
things
understand
as
like
well.
the use and purpose of social media is to get to you to eventually buy something.
Mhm.
Think of all those
Yeah,
ads.
nowadays especially, yeah.
Nowadays, especially. It used to be just pictures of food, y'all.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, because how it started was different.
Started cute.
Mhm.
Like how it started, how it's going.
Mhm, like, it
Um,
wasn't this.
that meme. I also want to share this quote: "The rigid idea that justice work centering Blackness, born from a lens of Black liberation, is only for Black people is limiting and false." So, talking about Nap Ministry, this book talks a lot about Black liberation. Like, this book is for everybody. Everyone can get this rest practice. Everyone's a part of it. I really appreciate that she talked about it, and she said something like, "There's some more too that I really appreciated." But she said on page 76. The rigid idea that justice work centers Blackness, born from a lens of Black liberation, is only for Black people is limiting and false. Black liberation is a global shift for an entire world
Mhm.
bamboozled by the lies of capitalism and white supremacy. The belief that one does and experiences does not affect everyone around them is a myth and disease that Americans severely suffer from. When we don't take our own rest while holding space for others around us to rest, we are functioning like the systems we want to gain freedom from. So I appreciated her saying that. And I don't know, I just feel like that's why we have to, like, as we're being more, this also brings me to this quote, like, rest keeps us tender and there is power in our tenderness and care. So the more kindness and grace and rest and space we give ourselves, the more we'll give others, the more understanding and capacity. That's the word that comes up that we'll have for others. But yeah.
Yeah, and going to the quote you just shared about Black liberation, I think for folks to be like, "Oh, is this for me?" It's like, well, you must not understand the work then, because the work is collective. It's for all, so we all benefit if Black folks are able to rest and be free and be liberated, and
Yes.
so it's
And
just like people just don't understand
we
the
don't know the
work.
history of America. Like, capitalism in America was built on Black bodies. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
if you don't understand that part of it, how can you even begin your journey to rest if you don't acknowledge like how it's linked to capitalism, and therefore why centering Blackness in this movement for rest, it's all synergic. Like, it's all connected. So I
Yeah,
really appreciate her.
it's like knowing the context. So it's like they're resting and probably co-opting this movement without understanding the context and the histories and like why it started. Like we rest out of like this is our divine right versus, if they're having these like lofty retreats in
Well,
Costa
that's
Rica
she
and
said.
stuff
She said
that's $5,000. It's like,
yeah, she
no,
said
your
anyone
rest
who's
is not
co-opting this,
liberation.
and not even footnoting, quoting like any of the ancestors she is named here, also her, the Nat Bishop, they're not really trying to get this radical rest. They're just trying
No.
to like be a sheep in this capitalist society and grind culture. They're like, I don't look like it. I'm gonna just cover myself in pillows. Like, no. So
Yeah.
I just really appreciate like the
The rest.
tones that she's giving in here. Like, she's giving directness. This is a
Yeah.
manual of how to
Mhm.
be, like how to
Yeah.
show up. Like, if
Mhm.
you read
That's
this
why she
book,
calls it a manifesto. She's like, "This is it right here. Like, I'm telling y'all, like, read it or not." But yeah, it's so very important when you are part of this work to understand the context. So of course she talks about like how, like, so we're talking about what is rest, what does that look like, what are the histories of it and
why?
the context, but how, right? So people do ask her all the time, like, how do I do this when I work a full-time job, when I have bills to pay? And a lot of her answers are just like basic, like you just rest. And so a quote I wanted to share is that rest is a meticulous love practice, which is a beautiful hint at the book we're going to be reading next month, all about love. And she shouted out bell hooks as well. But I just loved how she worded that. It's a meticulous love practice, right?
Mhm.
So when we talk about self love, like for February, right, the month of love, like rest is a part of that,
Yes.
right? Rest is a love practice. Like love as a practice is not a thing that just like happens upon you, but it's
Mhm.
an action. And so rest is how you can show love to yourself. So I thought that was really important that she mentioned, especially as we're unlearning and deprogramming and deconditioning ourselves, like to have
Mhm.
love for ourselves. And in order to
Mhm.
have love for ourselves is to rest. So I just thought that was so
Mhm.
beautiful.
I also love this question she shared with us during this chapter is like, what miraculous moments are you losing because you aren't resting? I think these questions made me pause again, like, oh, what moments I'm losing? Because
Hmm.
usually we think we're losing things because we are resting versus she's saying
Hmm.
because you aren't. So I love that flip. I had to reread this question, y'all. Because I was like, oh, what happens like when you're resting? What are you missing out on? Oh, no, when you aren't.
Hmm.
So that's something to think about. Like, so just ponder on that. Some of these questions
Yeah.
that we're sharing here, write them down, take a nap on them. She talks about that, you know, journal about them.
Yeah, I think for with this question as well, it makes me think of the pandemic
Mm.
and when we had to slow down, like we were forced to slow down and be still, how many of us did find those answers on what we were missing out on, right? Missing out on like really meaningful connections with folks, we're missing out on like having just like things to do for fun and joy that wasn't rooted
Hobbies?
in productivity, right? Yeah, like people are making banana bread, learning how to roller skate, finding like their love for plants. And so it's like, yeah, when we rest, we can find, these things that we really love and that nourish us that maybe when we are programmed into grind culture that is
Mhm.
just not there. And that goes into the next quote I wanted to share was that she says, I keep hearing about the ways we exhaust ourselves to be seen as valuable. And I'm wondering,
Mm.
when will we shift to see our inherent worth?
Mm.
I was just like, oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, just her writing that, I feel like it's just very affirming and healing that, like, we are valuable, we are worthy, and that resting does not take that away from us. If anything, it gets us closer to our true selves and to our
Yes,
divine selves.
yes.
So, yeah, I just feel like she definitely has a way of writing that is very healing, which makes sense for with her background. So that really resonated with me.
And then a question we want to uh, share with y'all is what would a well-rested world for all hold? This is tapping into like chapter 4 or part 4 already, imagination. So what would
Mhm.
a well-rested world for all hold? I mean, like that question, like it kind of taps in like for me, I'm like, I don't know. What would it look like? That's real. That's some futurism right there, y'all.
Mhm. Yeah, like, and this question kind of reminds me of just of all the healing that I think would happen. I guess my answer would be like the healing that would happen
Mm,
when we're all rested. Like I think there'd be less abuse, less of this capitalism
mhm.
and like extraction and exploitation and oppression when we rest, because I think more folks would realize that like, oh, like I don't need to do that, right? Like I'm whole and worthy in my own right. That I don't need to then oppress someone else, or I don't need to then exploit or extract from these resources here because I have everything within me. So I feel like it would be a more healed world.
I'm seeing abundance. We'll be less
Mhm,
extractive from each other,
mhm,
less transactional because we're always trying to save time, save ourselves. But in a well-rested world, we'd have more abundance of time, capacity, love, understanding. So yeah, I see like more capacity, like more like same thing. I'm using words that go with healing, like a healed world.
mhm.
Mhm.
So yeah, y'all can rest on that question. So yeah, how are you all feeling after reading and discussing part one, rest? You can leave a comment below. or you can rest on it, and we'll chat with you next session, next week, same time, same place. But yeah, just we wanted to give space for you all to kind of reflect. Like there was a lot that we discussed in today's live. We wanted time for you all to just sit and feel it all.
Hmm. I also wanted to take some time. I didn't look it up already, the link, but we have a like 10-minute meditation on YouTube that is a great way to take a type of rest. I would say like what would we classify physical rest? Yeah, right, Tony. We would classify meditation as a physical form of rest.
Yeah, so it's like mental,
Oh yes,
yeah,
that's what I was looking
and
for. Mental.
spiritual.
Mental and spiritual. So I'm going to share this in the chat with y'all, and as a gift from Soultry for y'all to give a try. If you want to add some a different type of rest into your resting repertoire, try out our 10-minute mindful meditation.
Yeah, and so I'll close with this quote from Tricia. So it's almost like an affirmation. So, may the portal of rest be our refuge. May we go there often. So, I'm excited to continue talking with you all about rest. About next week, we'll be talking about dreaming. So, that's what Kyle mentioned in the comments. Excited to read about dreaming in part two. But we wish you all a restful week. So again, if you aren't already, you can follow us at Soultry Sisters on all platforms. And next week we'll talk about Dream. So that's part two. And if you haven't already, you can learn more at our website, soultrysisters.com/book club. So thank you all for joining
Thank
week
you.
two. So again, we'll be going throughout January, and our last session for Rest is Resistance is February 1st. So Tricia, the author herself, will be joining us on StreamYard, so on YouTube Live. She'll be, we'll talk about Imagine for the first 30 minutes of that last session, and then the last 30 minutes she'll come on for a Q&A. So it's going to be really, really exciting. So we'll see you all then. And don't forget to subscribe to us at Soultry Sisters to be alerted when we come on next week.
Yes. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. We post some quotes that we're reading in the book and also share other ways to creatively rest.
Yes. All right. See y'all then.
Bye.
Bye.